So just good afternoon, everybody. My name's Fran from the Lincolnshire Chamber. Welcome to the latest of our ChamberConnect series, which is called Surviving to Thriving with Michelle Johnson from PCW Consulting Group. If I could just ask everybody to keep their microphones on mute, just so we can keep a bit of quiet so everyone can hear what's going on. Any questions, if you want to pop them in the chat box, then Michelle's got some time at the end of the session to go through and talk to everybody. Michelle, if you'd like to introduce yourself and take the floor.
That's great. Thanks for listening around. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Hopefully that's shared properly and technology's not failed us at the first hurdle. I'm just going to spend half an hour to 40 minutes just going through some slides with you, trying to make it fairly conversational. Unfortunately, obviously with Zoom, we find it's not particularly interactive. So there's a few questions posed sort of hypothetically for you to kind of pause and take time to give it some consideration. And at the end, as Fran said, we'll do the Q&A session. So hopefully you find it's of some use. So obviously today's session really just going through the purpose of where we are with the backdrop of COVID. Obviously we've heard the announcements today, really understanding as business leaders, as employees or potentially members of management within your businesses, how the consideration you've taken to how you're going to bring your business back. I use the word post-COVID, probably slightly ambitious, whether this is actually going to go away, we don't know, but really probably an opportunity to think about new year, new start as we move into January. And then looking at 3 simple steps that we would advise, so looking at how to recover revenue, if that's something that you're needing to do, how to rebuild your operations and rethinking your organisation, so just a bit of a reflection piece. And then really something that's lastly was really, really important. I think we've clearly all toyed with it for several years, but looking at business continuity. So what obviously have we learned from the last several months that we need to build into our continuity plans for future-proofing our business. Just a little bit about ourselves and PCW. So as Fran's kindly said, my name is Michelle Johnson. I'm the Head of Organisation Design and Development, and I joined the team back in September. Been doing some HR consultancy since then and some organisation stuff. Worked locally within the Lincolnshire area now for 10 years, and before that was down south, and working predominantly within the construction sector. So quite a moving feast over the last 15-20 years, where we've seen obviously the recession and significant changes. And myself, unfortunately, going through a big change last year where I was in a business and we went through an administration process. So first-hand been as a senior member of the management team going through that, and also as an employee as well. So from my perspective, just try and bring that knowledge and experience with organisation design, and obviously joined up with a HR background as well. And on the team, we've also got Richard and the 2 Mikes, and they've predominantly got financial backgrounds. As you can see, I'm not going to go through their profiles, but they're on the website to have a look. Chartered management backgrounds, have worked in tech businesses, worked across, again, global organisations, working specialists to try and obviously get businesses and broker investment opportunities for businesses. And they've all in their own rights had experience in buying and selling businesses over their many years of experience. And then our founder, who is a local gentleman you may have met through other opportunities with the Chamber, Paul Waldeck, who used to head up Waldeck Engineering. And Paul himself has obviously bought and acquired many businesses, and is a non-exec on several local SMEs, non-exec role recently as well. So that's the team, that's what we're about. So we really try and support businesses going through transformation change, and obviously nothing more poignant at the moment than what we've gone through over the last 8 months. Really, our strengths are trying to support businesses through mergers and acquisitions. As I touched on there, opportunities to try and find investments if that's the case, and obviously some businesses unfortunately do go through those challenging periods of the administration process, which we obviously assist with. Organisation design, so looking at how businesses are currently structured against their business plans and where their people and their processes sit behind that as well. There's a lot more things that we offer. We're also looking to offer a virtual back of house support business going forward into the new year. But if you want to find out a bit more, probably the best thing is to sort of summarise to say, have a look at our website for a bit more information. So right, we'll launch into the presentation. And obviously just a bit of a backtrack on where we've been, as we've probably all listened to the news with bated breath this morning to see where we sit at the lockdown. When I was writing this, obviously trying to remember where we've been this year was also somewhat of a challenge. Obviously the dates all merge into one, don't they? But obviously back in March, we went through the announcement that we were going into the lockdown situation. COVID had been with us for a few weeks. And we were then in a situation as business leaders to very quickly mobilise a home working model for people who were either going to be at home or to get our heads around what the new concept of furlough was going to be. So you can probably all sympathise that you were making those tricky decisions quite quickly, literally in a matter of 24 hours, as to what we were going to do with our workforces, to furlough or to not furlough, or to work from home in 9/10 of the situation. And for some of you might have been in the fortunate situation where operations continued. I know obviously with the construction clients that we have, it was pretty much 6 weeks of a little bit of pain to understand what was going to happen in the interpretation of the rules. And then we got back onto track and got people back into the safe way of working. So quite quick change for all the businesses to quickly get their heads around. Layered into that, we obviously had people going from the home working situation, which maybe some of you'd experienced historically. But this time, the education sector obviously shut its doors, and so we were quite quickly finding ourselves at home, also wearing multiple hats. Myself, I've been at home with a 2-year-old, and a husband at the start of lockdown was working from home as well. Yeah, very challenging, and certainly as business leaders and employers, it was kind of testing those boundaries between, you know, when does an employee become then a part-time worker in effect, because in reality, a lot of us had to throw the rule book out the window and say, we appreciate our employees are having to do their jobs in the hours that are available to them, and not necessarily their core hours that they would have traditionally done in an office setting. And then a few weeks down the line, we started to get to grips with technology. So Fran and I were talking about this at the start. How many of us are zoomed out? I clearly am. I Zoom every day. Before the pandemic, probably used video conferencing a handful of times every year, but wasn't a daily occurrence. And I'll happily admit that. So would be particularly one of those people to go face to face to meet clients. Technology's clearly superseded that. And again, just reflecting as businesses how we've got employees to think about using technology. You know, we would particularly, a study I read last week, if we were starting to look at embedding technology into our businesses, we'd look at a 12-month gestation period, because we'd start to overthink it, and we think about all the training that we're going to need, the cost of investing in the technology, and obviously kind of get into the situation where we were looking at all the different offerings. And obviously quite quickly in March, we were there with a suite of existing technology that was available, and had to make quick decisions of how and when we were going to implement them. And for the majority of us, it was an overnight decision that kind of organically happened. And then as we moved through the summer months, we kind of, the lockdown eased, and we started to move people back into the office arena for some. And you obviously then had the ownership as business leaders to start thinking about social distancing. So I know one office that I was supporting at the time, floor plans came out of the cabinets. We started to look at how we were going to socially distance the 2-metre rule around the office, demarcate the toilet facilities, the kitchen facilities, etc. All day-to-day distractions from what our business leader hats are going to be, things that have taken us away from our day-to-day operations, but obviously absolutely vital in the effort to obviously keep our employees safe. As we moved beyond that, we obviously then got to a place where we started to ease again, and there was an element and feeling, probably in September time, we were getting back to a feeling of some form of normality back in the office arena for those who'd returned. We obviously socially distancing, but started to slightly creep back into our old ways potentially of how we did business. And at that point, obviously, some of our clients were starting to talk around things that they'd not been doing for the last 6-7 months, such as business planning, things that had been slightly mothballed. But then, obviously, the news that broke a couple of weeks ago, we obviously entered lockdown again, and we're back on repeat. So we're back into the situation that, you know, obviously we're all unfortunately in this place together to go back through the lockdown situation with all our business plans and our strategizing how we're going to move our business forward. So just taking a couple of minutes, you've probably all given it some forethought, either as business owners or as employees. You know, how are you starting to think as businesses that how you're going to bring your business back post-COVID? And as I apologised at the start of the presentation, the word post is probably slightly clumsy. We don't know for sure if this is going to go away next year. But one opportunity, I think we all go back into the new year and start thinking new year, new start. And that's certainly something I'm starting to encourage with businesses. Give it some time over December to start thinking about what we're going to do when we get back into January, whether we're physically back in offices, whether still in lockdown or not. But it's a new year and a bit of a new start for businesses to start thinking about some of these things we're going to go through. So some food for thought, really, to start triggering some of that consideration. Returning. So will you actually return to the way you'd worked before? Is this something that we're going to do? You've maybe already started to think about the physical location. So are we going to go back to the office? Are we actually going to physically return to the office space that we've leased or we own? What are we going to resolve? So obviously there's been some matters that we've maybe mothballed, which we touched on before. There's some things that I know in businesses have just been a distraction during lockdown, or we've physically not been able to do that because we've been remote working. So what do we need to get back on track? And that's an opportunity to look at those business plans to think what do we need to get back and resolve. An opportunity to reform. So really bringing those teams back together and resharing what that business plan might look like. How are we going to get people to re-engage with what we're doing? Because we've been probably now at the start of the initial lockdown, probably thought it was a matter of weeks, and it's obviously gone on for months. For some businesses, it's a really, really exciting opportunity to reimagine and think about what they're going to do in the future. In Lincolnshire alone, we've seen some really exciting diversification over the last 6 months. There's obviously gin manufacturers producing hand sanitizer. We've got engineering businesses producing ventilators. And some of that is obviously the diversification that's been driven by the market and the situation that has arisen. But there might be a clear change and demarcation where that service is not going to be needed. So, if COVID does disappear, then potentially those businesses might have that opportunity to return back to what they were doing historically. So really good opportunity to start thinking about what we need to do and reimagine how we previously did it. And then resilience. I think, not necessarily just from a business perspective, but certainly from an employee perspective, what have we learned over the last few months, and how resilient have we been as business leaders, as employees, and certainly how have our business operations stood up against the challenges that we faced over the last few months. So yes, five words there that I find quite useful just to recap and give a bit of a reflection on what we've done. I think we can all put our hand on heart and say we've been running 100 miles an hour, and maybe have those worrying concerns and conversations privately at home in an evening, but not necessarily really thinking strategically around what we're going to do to get the businesses back on track. So one of the steps what we would suggest looking at initially is recovering the revenue. And now obviously for some businesses, they haven't necessarily had a financial burden for the last few months. And I don't want to kind of assume that everybody's in a situation of a crisis, but obviously looking at the forecast yesterday, the city are predicting that potentially we're going to have some recovery challenges right back through till 2025. So we do need to start thinking, if we haven't had that situation now, what is our long-term plan going to be with our cash forecasts? So let's look at our opportunities. So, where we're in markets at the moment, what's the market telling us? Do we know that market's going to be there? What are customers telling us? Unfortunately, some businesses have obviously lost some suppliers or clients along the way over the last few months. So really just restocking that and looking at those opportunities again to see where we're going to be. Diversification, we've just touched on that. So obviously that's another way to secure and grow your revenue. If you haven't already done it, necessarily it might be something that some businesses are considering. Cash is always king, and it's always one of the first things when we look at business recovery. One of the first things we probably look at is overhead costs, and certainly has been in HR for several years. The training costs are always a thing to go. I've had many battles over the years to try and sustain a level of training when we're going through challenging periods. But in reality, the coalface, the decision is quite black and white. It's a luxury, and generally seen as a luxury to have. But just take a step back and rewind it and think, if you've got individuals out there who are going to try and sell to clients in a very challenging market, they need to be really persuasive and really convincing. So giving them an element of training again and getting them back on track, getting them to believe in your products or your vision, really probably will pay dividends in the long run. So it doesn't necessarily now need to be classroom-based training where they're all toddling off for 5 days. It could be online training where they've obviously got an opportunity to just, again, refresh what they're going out to the market to do. And again, the element of how sales leads are going to do that selling is very different now. So obviously you might have had sales staff who've been furloughed and they're coming back into an arena of using this technology. How do they engage with customers remotely from what they would have done face-to-face traditionally? Really good opportunity to look at repayment terms. It's one of those things, I suppose, businesses and boards don't want to do in times that are positive for the majority, because it always feels it kind of leaves that question mark of, oh, where's this business going if we start talking about changing payment terms. If you went into a client or a supply chain relationship and said, we want to reduce our payment terms, alarm bells will certainly probably start to sound. But the current backdrop is a really good opportunity to have those conversations. Everybody's in a very similar situation. So it might be a really good opportunity to sit with those trusted partners to say, look, we're on 90-day terms. Is there any opportunity we can negotiate that down? And it might obviously help with some of the cash forecasting as well. And then lastly on there, reforecast. It goes without saying, but I would imagine over the last few months, a lot of businesses' management information has probably been slightly mothballed as well. And it's been fairly skeletal in what's been offered to the board. So really going through that in a bit more of an analytical review and thinking, where are we? What's the forecast going to look like for the next year? Beyond, if we can get it, and obviously look at where the lumps might be with the cash flow as well. So just a quick précis, obviously, to look at that. As I say, revenue might not necessarily be a concern for some businesses, but if it's not now, then it's not an opportunity. It's an opportunity to maybe just look again for the future. So rebuilding your operations, an opportunity to just start to think about what you should stop doing. So again, just a bit of a reflection piece. What have we done over the last few months that we really don't want to continue to do? So historically, as I said at the start of the presentation, I like to go out to clients. I like to do the face-to-face. I will happily sit on the train to London or go on the A1 and sit in my car for a few hours. I've probably accepted that it's not the best use of my time, and I think clients are more receptive that it's acceptable to now use technology. So I think for us as business, we will probably try and, where we can, use technology as the first instance. So that will certainly shape our plans and ultimately how we work and engage with clients. For some, you might decide not to return to the office at all. I know some businesses are making that declaration and quite publicly sharing that at the moment. So, is that going to work for your business plan? Does it work for your clients? And more importantly, does it work for your employees as well? Then there's opportunity to think about what you're going to continue to do. So obviously, for those who have used technology, has it been well received by the employees and the clients? Is it something that you want to continue to do? Is it an opportunity to look at where, you've had opportunities where you've done less meetings, for example? I mean, let's be honest, if we're in the office, we might have a meeting every day just for the sake that we're in the office and we can catch up. Whereas in technology, we've maybe found that that's been consolidated to a weekly review. So really thinking about, again, that reflection piece about what you want to change. And then what do we want to go back to doing? What were we doing before this COVID struck in January, if we can remember that far back? And what do we want to return to doing? Some of it might just be the softer stuff in getting our teams together and restocking on and sharing information. As I say, I think, with not many businesses have had the time and the breathing space to actually share the business plans back with the employees. And again, it might just be something that you want to factor into the next few months. So just an opportunity, really, just a bit of reflection on what's happened, what we can start, what we can continue, and what we might want to return to do. And then really thinking about the purpose. So who are we? And this has kind of got lost along the way for some of us over the last few months. Obviously some businesses, as I say, have had to diversify, and with that maybe feel that some of their identity is gone. A really good example, and probably the only massive change that we've gone through in this last 100 years, was World War II. Obviously, Coca-Cola at the time were a brand that had been around, and in war efforts were seen as somewhat of a luxury, obviously sugared product. Everybody was rationing. It wasn't a product that people were going to go out and buy, and purely couldn't get hold of it for a period. So the marketing guys at Coca-Cola embraced the change management process that was going on, and really looked to rebrand the product as align it to the war effort. So US soldiers were given Coke as a free drink, and they got behind it in the fact that we are here to support the US Army. And really that really sensible decision at that time just showed how that business could use that change opportunity to realign their purpose, and went from a business that quite quickly could have been in a state of turmoil to really thriving. So I think it's quite a good example to think about. You know, we're not necessarily on the same scale as Coca-Cola, but we've seen it in the UK with the likes of Pret a Manger. They were very quickly off the marks, giving the NHS staff free coffees. And then obviously Domino's kicked in with the free pizzas for NHS staff. That might not necessarily change their purpose moving forward, but it's clearly changed some of their strategic thinking in how they want to be positioned in the market with their customers. Okay. And then obviously moving on beyond that, so how will we actually operate? So, you know, we've talked around some of the reflection pieces, but then moving it into the practical thing of how we're actually going to operate. Hate to say this phrase because it feels like sometimes it's slightly disrespectful, but out with the old and in with new, not from a people perspective, but actually sometimes just from a process perspective, as we talked about then, you know, thinking about what we've done that we might not want to embed as part of our operating ways of doing things. So when you think about purpose, we generally think about the 5 Ps. So the purpose that we've got, the products and the portfolio that we have on offering, our people, which is obviously fundamental to what we do, the performance, and obviously with that, the financial performance of the business, and then where we want to position ourselves as well. So we've really seen, obviously, over the last few months, when I've certainly witnessed, and I know some businesses have, and some businesses have found it slightly more of a challenging, but for the large majority, there's been a huge team effort. You know, quickly employees were split into overnight working, at home, childcare setting for some wearing other hats such as carers, and they still managed to fulfil their duties and really came together as a team. For many business leaders, you will have relinquished a lot of roles and responsibilities. I certainly know there's some businesses out there who were quite driven by decisions going through the board, lots of sign-off processes, lots of bureaucracy that overnight quite quickly had to change just to make sure that the business functioned. So again, are they things that we're going to stop doing? Are we going to start? And how's that going to impact on those teams if we start taking that responsibility away? So lots of talent empowerment. So people at middle management making quite fundamental decisions that they maybe have never done before, you know, and ultimately that's left obviously a positive taste in the employees' appetite to stay with that business. A huge part of what we're going to be faced with is flexibility. So we've obviously witnessed it where employees are at home. I'm unfortunate, I'm the opposite end of the scale, where if I'm at home I seem to do far many more hours because I don't know why, it's just not in me to kind of think about stopping for a tea or coffee or lunch. But employees have enjoyed that flexibility. You know, if they want to pop at 3 o'clock to pick the children up from school for 10 minutes, I can imagine they've done that and they felt that they've been able to do that. But how is that going to operate for you as a business? Is that something that you want to create more of an agile working arrangement, moving away from contractual hours to more discretionary hours, as long as the job gets done? So things that we need to think about, because obviously these are things that the employees are going to have on their wish list as well moving forward. And obviously, as we've seen, as businesses have moved into a remote working setting, and if that is part of your strategic aim moving forward, you've clearly got more of an access to a wider geographical pool of people. So Lincolnshire, you know, we do struggle in certain markets to get certain skill sets. Some of the physical jobs, you know, I couldn't necessarily recruit a bricklayer for a Lincolnshire-based home builder and not expect them to be in Lincolnshire. That would be ludicrous. But obviously home-based roles, technology-led businesses, where potentially we have struggled to generate that talent coming through, might be able to then access that from a wider geographical pool. There's obviously some things you really need to think about if you're going to do that, and obviously the fact that we want to keep the Lincolnshire economy going and we want to keep people in jobs in the Lincolnshire area, but obviously there is that opportunity to maybe consider that and think about it sensibly and how you plan your business around that moving forward. And then the big thing really is going to be how we're going to grow the businesses. So obviously many businesses will have had ambitions this year for quite significant growth. For some, no doubt, have seen that growth and have really flourished, which is great. For others, probably just taking a stock of where we are again and re-establishing where that growth is going to come from. So really on the growth piece, it's going to go back to the people asset, really a fundamental part of what we're going to need. So for a business that's very people orientated, you're going to have the right people in the right roles. Looking at the leadership team that you've got in place, are they aligned to what that growth is going to be? Have they got the appetite for the growth? There's no point having 5 board members if 3 of them don't want to grow and two of them do. You need to be joined up and aligned to that appetite for growth as well. And then one of the things that we spend a lot of time looking at is the systems and procedures that sit behind that. So as businesses grow, typically the infrastructure is not in place to support that growth. And we tend to layer it up with people or additional clumsy ways of doing things. And it's a real good opportunity to start getting some of those systems and processes in place now as businesses start to grow. With that, we're obviously going to have some people investment potentially as well. So, you know, again, as a business grows, we don't want to necessarily be reactively recruiting. So it's more paramount to start thinking about what we're going to need to support that growth plan. So if you've got access to a wider geographical pool, what are the roles going to be and when do you need to start recruiting for them? Let's not wait until later next year when potentially there's going to be a higher demand on resource. Thinking about now, there's this really high talented individuals who are coming out of businesses and thinking how they're going to fit in your business plans moving forward. Technology, we can't escape it. Obviously, as I touched on earlier, lots of businesses had wanted to invest in technology and saw that part of their growth plan, but obviously it was generally typically taking about 12 months to get that on board. And we're overthinking it and worrying about costs and worrying about training. We've seen that it can happen fairly swiftly. So again, thinking about what that technology plan might look like for you as well. And probably just in summary to that growth piece, really understanding what your partnership's wanting from that. So, you know, if customers have ambition for growth, that's great because that can scale up to your plan as well. And you obviously need to know that your supply chain's robust enough as well. So unfortunately, we've probably seen some casualties over the last few months, and that you might need to diversify your supply chain as well and broaden that slightly more beyond that. So just really understanding what the appetite is within your wider team, not just necessarily your team within your actual physical business. So planning to thrive then. Moving forward, we've talked about at the start of the presentation, the need for business planning. I used to sit in a board and it was my responsibility to manage the business continuity plans. And I'll happily admit, every 3 months, it would come around to that session and I'd kind of fear for the session. It was an hour, 2 hours, and we'd try and think about every scenario and reinvigorate the plan every time we met. But in reality, it had kind of started to collect dust. And the plan would kind of grow with circumstance we considered. I think we planned for the red arrows falling out the sky, dropping onto the office. We planned for gas leaks. We planned for things like the swine flu. But I don't think anybody, no matter how robust the continuity plan was going to be, would have planned for a pandemic with the impact that Corona's had. We may have had pandemics cited in our business continuity plans, but we wouldn't have really considered the whole concept of lockdowns and the mobilisation of remote workers in quite a rapid succession is what we found. So we probably need to really think about the foresight around how that's going to work in a business. And I suppose we can live in the past of what's happened the last few months, but we kind of need to accept that that's happened and just really take an opportunity to learn from that. And that's what we've obviously captured in this presentation. You know, what's happened and what do we need to now build into our plans moving forward? So hand in hand with the business plan, forming a business continuity plan that supports and supplements that as well. So adopting new processes and practices and how they might happen. We know we're going to go through more change. So it's, you know, we can plan for future pandemics, but it's highly likely, you know, technology is going to take advances where we're going to need to forecast and plan that. Our employees are going to want more flexibility. We've seen that and we're going to continue to see that. And we know there's going to be global changes. We know the challenges we've got just in the UK to reduce CO2. And obviously there's going to be challenges there to reduce our footprint in probably mobility around the UK. So we know there's going to be challenges that we need to start addressing. We just need to be really open-minded around how we're going to do it. We've talked about looking at our purpose, so re-establishing that purpose and designing around it. So sometimes we end up designing our business around our people. So we have 50 people, we start worrying, and it's human sense when we've worked with people for many years to start worrying that when times are hard, I'm saying this to Fran at the start of the presentation, we instantly go into mindset, we think we're going to go into a redundancy situation. We think restructure means redundancy and job losses. And it's not necessarily about that. You know, for businesses to thrive, you maybe need to keep a lot of that talent in the business, but it's aligning their roles to the purpose of your business and really making sure that they're in the right positions and they've got the right skills and capabilities. And I think more importantly, that the employees have got the appetite for the business moving forward. So really think about getting an impartial view of your structure. It's something we can offer. We do half-an-hour clinics every week. More than happy to sort of act as a sounding ear for businesses, but really having that kind of outsider looking into the business. Sometimes we can't always see internally what's under our noses. You know, how are the batons being passed between processes and teams? I've clearly witnessed in departments before that we've got a really good process on paper. We think we've got a really good process in practice, and yet to everybody else who's living and breathing the practice every day, it's falling on its heels every day. And that's simply because we're all in the business and we're living and breathing it and we think it's good. So sometimes kind of taking that step away and looking at it objectively, and that's something, and impartially, and that's something we can offer. The main important thing is obviously being agile and proactive, and we know that circumstances are going to change. I think we've all gone through quite a rapid period of change over the last few months, and really making sure that within our teams, within our leadership teams, and as employees, we continue to harbour that agile mindset. I think is really, really important. So how you purpose your business moving forward is really crucial to ensure that employees and business leaders are really like foresight to how they're going to continue with that agility. And that's me finished. That's the waffling concluded. So hopefully you found that useful. The voice is drying out. So please feel free to share in the chat box any questions that you might have, and we'll go through them in a second. As I say, if there's anything that you'd like to speak to us confidentially about, we do the half-an-hour free sessions, drop-in clinics. Obviously, given the current climate, we do them via Zoom calls or team calls, whatever your preference is. But when hopefully we get back into the new year, we're more than happy to pop out to people's offices and have face-to-face introductions as well. Thank you ever so much for your time, and we'll get on to the Q&As if we've got any.
Fantastic, thanks Michelle, really informative. I don't know if people just want to take their mics off mute and just ask questions, feel free. I don't think there's anything in the chat box at the moment, but if you'd like to take advantage of Michelle being here now and quizzing her out on anything, please do.
Before it gets dark and the light goes even worse.
Technology was fine.
Absolutely, yeah, technology works, just a lighter as the day goes on. Well, thank you ever so much for your attendance. It's an enjoyable session, and hopefully, as I say, if you've got any questions, contact details are on this slide. We've got the website, just feel free to drop us a line. Every Thursday we run the clinics, but we are flexible with that. So if you want a phone call out of hours, weekends, evenings, we appreciate some sensitivity at the moment. It's not necessarily appropriate to have in-office arenas, so feel free to give us a call.
Fantastic. And if you've got any questions, you know, come to the chamber and we can point you in the right direction to Michelle and the rest of the team. Okay, fantastic.
Thank you, Francesca, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.